night, the boundaries between fire and water dissolve like molten glass, cooling in the Adriatic breeze. Feel the salt-tinged air, heavy with centuries of secrets, where each breath carries the whispered formulas of masters who shaped light itself into objects of impossible beauty. If this journey touches your soul, join us again and whisper from where you listen to us. Now, dim the lights, breathe deeply. Let us dream with memories that are not our own. I awaken in the hour before dawn, when Murano sleeps beneath a blanket of mist that rises from the lagoon like the breath of sleeping giants. The island rests in that liminal space between night and day, between dream and waking, between the mundane world of commerce and the magical realm where fire transforms sand into wonder. My bare feet find the cold stone floor of my chamber, and already I can feel the pull of the furnace calling me to another day of communion with the ancient mysteries. The mist outside my window glows with an ethereal light, illuminated from within by the furnaces that never sleep, never rest, never allow their sacred flames to die. For 300 years, the fires of our workshop have burned continuously, tended by generations of my family who understood that to let them cool would be to lose more than heat. It would be to break a chain of knowledge that stretches back to the very founding of our craft on this isolated island. I dress in the darkness, my hands finding familiar garments without need of sight. The leather apron that bears the scorch marks of 1,000 encounters with molten glass. The linen shirt loose enough to allow the fluid movements that our work demands. The heavy boots that have carried me through decades of dancing with fire, their soles thick enough to protect against the scattered fragments of cooling glass that litter our workshop floor like fallen stars. The streets of Murano are empty at this hour, save for the occasional figure moving through the mist, another master called by the same ancient rhythms, another keeper of secrets making his way to tend the flames that define our existence. We nod to each other in passing, these silent acknowledgments between members of a brotherhood that needs no words, no formal recognition, only the shared understanding that we serve something greater than ourselves. The workshop emerges from the mist like a cathedral of industry, its tall chimneys reaching towards heaven, its windows glowing with the warm light of furnaces that never known darkness. The building itself seems to pulse with contained energy, as if the very stones have absorbed the heat and passion of centuries of creation. This is my temple, my sanctuary, the place where the impossible becomes routine, and the miraculous is merely another day's work. I unlock the heavy wooden door with a key that has been passed down through 5 generations. Its iron worn smooth by countless hands, its weight familiar as a prayer bead. The workshop greets me with its symphony of controlled chaos. The roar of furnaces, the hiss of cooling glass, the gentle bubble of molten material waiting to be shaped. Even in the pre-dawn hours, the space thrums with life, with potential, with the accumulated energy of centuries of creation. The furnaces dominate the central space like altars to some ancient fire god, their mouths glowing with heat that could melt copper, that could transform the humblest sand into objects of transcendent beauty. The largest furnace, the one we call the Mother, has burned without interruption since my great-grandfather's time. Her flames have witnessed the birth of goblets that graced the tables of doges, of mirrors that reflected the faces of queens, of chandeliers that illuminated the palaces of princes. I approach the mother with the reverence due to a living thing, feeling the heat wash over me like a benediction. The temperature here is precisely controlled, maintained at the exact degree necessary to keep the glass in its perfect state of malleability, hot enough to flow like honey, cool enough to hold its shape when properly worked. This balance is one of our most closely guarded secrets, achieved through techniques passed down through bloodlines, never written, never shared with outsiders. The glass itself waits in the crucibles like liquid light, glowing with an inner fire that seems almost alive. This is not ordinary glass. It is cristallo, the clearest, purest material ever created by human hands, so transparent it seems to be made of crystallized air itself. The formula for its creation is known to fewer than a dozen men on this island, protected by oaths sworn in blood, by penalties that extend beyond mere death to the destruction of entire family lines. As I prepare for the day's work, checking the temperature of the furnaces, examining the quality of the molten glass, testing the tools that will serve as extensions of my will, I feel the presence of those who came before me. My grandfather, who could shape glass with such delicacy that his goblets seemed to be made of frozen breath. My father, who discovered the secret of incorporating gold into glass without losing its clarity. The unnamed masters who first learned to capture the essence of fire and make it serve human vision. The mist outside begins to thin as the first pale light of dawn touches the lagoon. But here in the workshop, time moves differently. We exist in a realm governed not by the sun's passage, but by the rhythm of creation, by the dance between fire and breath, by the ancient dialogue between human will and elemental force. This is the hour of possibility, when the day stretches ahead like molten glass waiting to be shaped, when every breath holds the potential for miracle, when the boundary between the possible and impossible grows thin as spun glass. The mother furnace breathes before me like a living creature, her flames dancing in patterns that speak of centuries of careful tending. I approach her with the measured steps of a priest approaching an altar, for that is what she truly is, a sacred space where the elements themselves are transformed, where earth becomes light, where the impossible becomes inevitable through the marriage of fire and human will. The heat strikes me in waves as I draw near, each pulse carrying with it the accumulated wisdom of generations. This furnace has never been allowed to cool completely, never permitted to die, for to do so would be to lose more than mere temperature. It would be to break the continuity of knowledge that flows through these flames like blood through veins. My great-grandfather lit this fire with coals taken from his master's furnace, which in turn had been kindled from flames that traced their lineage back to the very founding of our craft on this island. I begin the morning ritual of feeding the mother, selecting each piece of fuel with the care of a jeweler choosing gems. The wood must be perfectly dry, seasoned for exactly 3 years, cut from trees that grew in specific soils under particular conditions. Too much moisture and the flames will cool, disrupting the delicate balance that keeps our glass in its perfect state of malleability. Too little, and the fire burns too hot, too fast, consuming itself in destructive passion rather than sustaining the steady heat that creation demands. The flames accept my offering with a satisfied roar, their color shifting subtly as the new fuel catches and burns.
I read these changes like a scholar reads ancient texts, understanding that each variation in hue and intensity carries information about the furnace's condition, its needs, its readiness to serve the day's work. Young Paolo arrives as I complete the feeding ritual, his footsteps hesitant on the workshop floor. At 16, he is still learning to read the furnace's moods, still struggling to understand that this is not merely a tool, but a partner in the ancient dance of creation. He carries with him the nervous energy of youth, the eagerness to begin that must be tempered with patience, with respect for the forces we seek to harness. "Maestro," he whispers, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the flames themselves. "The glass in the third crucible, it seems different this morning."
I move to examine the vessel he indicates, seeing immediately what has caught his attention. The molten glass within glows with a slightly different quality than its companions, a subtle variation that speaks of impurities in the batch, of sand that carried within it traces of iron or other minerals that alter the final product. To the untrained eye, the difference would be invisible, but Paolo is learning to see with the sensitivity that our craft demands. "Good," I tell him, watching as pride flickers across his young features. "You are beginning to see what the glass tells us. This batch will serve for practice pieces, for experiments, for the work that teaches without risking our finest materials. The impurities make it less valuable for our most important commissions, but they also make it more forgiving, more willing to accept the mistakes that learning requires. The lesson extends beyond mere technical observation to the deeper philosophy of our craft. We work with living materials that carry their own histories, their own characteristics, their own preferences. The sand that forms the base of our glass comes from specific beaches, chosen not just for purity, but for the subtle qualities that generations of masters have learned to recognize and value. Each grain carries within it the story of its origin, the rocks from which it was worn, the waters that shaped it, the winds that carried it to the shores where we harvest it. The morning progresses as I guide Paolo through the ritual of preparation that must precede any serious work. The tools must be heated to the proper temperature, their metal expanded to the precise degree that allows them to work in harmony with the molten glass. The workbench must be cleared and organized, every implement in its appointed place, for in the heat of creation there is no time to search for misplaced tools. The pontil rods stand ready in their rack, each one a masterpiece of metallurgy in its own right. These are not mere tools, but extensions of the glassblower's will, forged from iron that has been refined through processes as secret as any of our glass formulas. The metal must be strong enough to support the weight of molten glass, flexible enough to allow the subtle movements that shaping requires, yet responsive enough to transmit the craftsman's intentions without distortion. I select my favorite pontil rod, feeling its familiar weight in my hands, testing its balance with movements that have become as natural as breathing. This rod has served me for 20 years, has been the conduit through which countless visions have flowed from imagination into reality. Its surface bears the accumulated patina of decades of use, the subtle discolorations that speak of temperatures endured, of glass gathered and shaped, of miracles made manifest through the marriage of human skill and elemental force. The furnace reaches its optimal temperature as the morning light begins to filter through the workshop windows. mixing with the glow of the flames to create an illumination that exists nowhere else on earth. This is the light that reveals truth, that shows glass in its essential nature, that allows the master to see not just what is, but what could be. In this perfect illumination, the molten material seems to pulse with inner life, ready to respond to the craftsman's vision, eager to take whatever form human imagination can conceive. Paolo watches with the intensity of a scholar studying sacred texts as I approach the crucible, pontil in hand, ready to begin the ancient dance of gathering. This is the moment when preparation transforms into creation, when the accumulated wisdom of centuries focuses into a single point of contact between human will and elemental fire. The glass waits, patient and ready, holding within its molten heart the potential for transformation, for transcendence, for the miracle that turns sand into light and fire into beauty. The moment of gathering arrives like the first breath of a newborn, anticipated, inevitable, yet somehow miraculous each time it occurs. I approach the crucible with the pontil rod extended, feeling the heat intensify with each step until the air itself seems to shimmer with contained energy. The molten glass waits within its ceramic vessel, glowing like captured starlight, its surface rippling with currents that speak of temperatures beyond human endurance, yet somehow made servant to human will. The pontil touches the surface of the molten glass with the gentleness of a lover's caress, and immediately the material begins to respond. It clings to the iron rod with an eagerness that never fails to amaze me, flowing upward and outward like liquid honey, yet possessed of a life and will of its own. This is the first magic of our craft, the moment when solid becomes liquid, when the rigid transforms into the fluid, when the impossible marriage between fire and earth yields offspring of transcendent beauty. I begin the ancient dance of gathering, rotating the pontil with movements that have been refined through centuries of practice, each turn calculated to collect the precise amount of glass needed for the work ahead. Too little, and the piece will lack substance, will be fragile and insubstantial. Too much, and it becomes unwieldy, impossible to control with the delicacy that fine work demands. The glass flows onto the rod like molten light, its weight increasing with each revolution, its glow intensifying as it absorbs more of the furnace's heat. Paolo watches from his position beside the glory hole, that smaller furnace where glass is reheated during the shaping process. His young eyes follow every movement of my hands, every subtle shift in the pontil's angle, trying to decode the mysteries that govern this most fundamental of our techniques. I can see in his expression the same wonder I felt at his age, the same recognition that he is witnessing something that transcends mere craft and approaches the realm of the miraculous. The glass gathers in perfect spirals around the pontil, each layer adding to the growing mass while maintaining the precise temperature that keeps it workable. This is cristallo at its finest, so pure it seems to be made of crystallized air, so clear that light passes through it without distortion, carrying with it the accumulated fire of the furnace itself. The formula for creating such glass is one of our most closely guarded secrets, known to fewer than a dozen masters on the entire island.
As the gathering progresses, I feel the glass responding to my intentions, becoming an extension of my will rather than merely a material to be shaped. This is the moment when the craftsman and his medium achieve perfect harmony, when the boundary between human vision and elemental force dissolves into something greater than either could achieve alone. The glass seems to anticipate my movements, flowing where I needed to flow, gathering where I needed to gather, becoming not just obedient, but collaborative. The weight of the gathered glass grows heavier on the pontil, and I adjust my grip to accommodate the changing balance. This is knowledge that lives in the muscles and bones, understanding that cannot be taught through words, but must be absorbed through countless repetitions, through the patient accumulation of experience that transforms apprentice into journeyman, journeyman into master. Each gathering is different, each piece of glass unique in its characteristics and requirements. I withdraw the pontil from the crucible, the gathered glass glowing like a small sun at its tip. The material continues to flow and shift, seeking its own equilibrium while remaining responsive to my guidance. This is the critical moment when the glass is most vulnerable, most likely to develop the flaws that will doom the finished piece. Temperature, timing, and technique must all align perfectly, or hours of work will be reduced to fragments on the workshop floor. The glory hole awaits it, its smaller flames ready to maintain the glass at the precise temperature needed for shaping. I move toward it with measured steps, feeling the heat intensify as I approach, watching the glass respond to the changing thermal environment. The material seems to pulse with inner life, its surface rippling with currents that speak of the elemental forces contained within its molten heart. Paulo opens the glory hole's door with practiced timing, his movements synchronized with mine through months of training. The additional heat washes over the gathered glass, restoring the perfect malleability that shaping requires. I rotate the pontil slowly, evenly, ensuring that the heat penetrates uniformly through the mass, that no part becomes too cool or too hot for the work ahead. The glass begins to glow more intensely in the glory hole's embrace, its color shifting from the deep amber of cooling material to the brilliant orange-white of perfect working temperature. This is the moment of truth when the gathered glass reveals its true nature, its willingness to accept the craftsman's vision, its readiness to be transformed from mere molten sand into something approaching the divine.
I can feel the glass reaching the optimal state through the pontil rod, the subtle vibrations that travel up the iron shaft, speaking of material that is neither too hot nor too cool, neither too fluid nor too rigid, but perfectly balanced in that narrow range where miracles become possible. This is knowledge that cannot be measured by instruments, cannot be reduced to numbers or formulas, but must be felt through the accumulated sensitivity of decades spent in communion with molten glass. The gathering is complete, the glass perfectly prepared for the shaping that will follow. At the tip of my pontil rod glows a mass of material that holds within it infinite possibility. It could become a goblet fit for a doe's table, a mirror that reflects more than mere images, a window that frames views of paradise itself. The choice is mine, guided by vision, constrained by skill, made possible by the ancient knowledge that flows through these flames like blood through veins. Paolo steps back as I withdraw the pontil from the glory hole, his eyes wide with the recognition that he has witnessed something fundamental, something that connects our humble workshop to the great chain of creation that stretches from the first human who learned to shape fire to the last craftsman who will tend these flames. In the glowing glass at the tip of my rod lies the accumulated wisdom of centuries, the patient knowledge of generations who understood that to work with molten light is to participate in the ongoing creation of the world itself. The blowpipe waits in my other hand like a sacred instrument, its hollow iron shaft worn smooth by generations of lips that have breathed life into molten glass. This is the tool that transforms our craft from mere shaping into something approaching divine creation. The ability to inflate glass from within, to give it volume and grace through nothing more than human breath guided by ancient knowledge. I transfer the gathered glass from pontil to blowpipe with movements that have become as natural as breathing, feeling the material respond to this new relationship, this different kind of partnership. The first breath is always the most crucial, the moment when human intention meets elemental resistance and must find the perfect balance between force and gentleness. Too much pressure and the glass will rupture, spilling its molten contents across the workshop floor in a cascade of wasted potential. Too little, and it remains solid, unyielding, refusing to accept the gift of interior space that will transform it from mere mass into vessel, from simple material into functional beauty. I place my lips against the blowpipe's mouthpiece, feeling the metal's warmth against my skin, tasting the familiar tang of iron that has been heated and cooled countless times in service to our craft. The glass at the other end glows like a small sun, its surface rippling with the contained energy of the furnace, ready to respond to the breath that will give it new form, new purpose, new life. The first gentle exhalation flows through the hollow pipe, and I feel the glass begin to yield, to accept the pressure, to expand from within like a flower opening to the sun. This is the moment of transformation, when solid becomes hollow, when mass becomes space, when the impossible marriage of fire and air creates something that neither could achieve alone. The glass swells slightly, its surface stretching to accommodate the growing bubble of air within. Paolo watches with the intensity of a scholar studying sacred texts, understanding that he is witnessing one of the fundamental mysteries of our craft. The ability to blow glass is not merely a technique, but a form of communion, a dialogue between human breath and elemental fire that requires not just skill, but a kind of faith, a belief that the material will respond to intention, will accept guidance, will become partner rather than merely medium. I continue the gentle inflation, each breath carefully measured, each exhalation precisely controlled. The glass responds like a living thing, expanding and contracting with the rhythm of my breathing, its walls growing thinner as the interior space increases. This is the delicate balance that separates the master from the apprentice, the ability to sense exactly how much pressure the glass can accept, how thin its walls can become before they lose their strength, how large the bubble can grow before it becomes unstable. The workshop fills with the soft sound of controlled breathing, the gentle hiss of air flowing through iron, the almost inaudible whisper of glass stretching to accommodate new dimensions. These are the sounds of creation in its most intimate form, the quiet dialogue between craftsman and material that lies at the heart of our ancient art. In this moment, the boundary between human and elemental dissolves, and we become collaborators in the ongoing work of transformation. As the glass expands, I begin to shape it with subtle movements of the blowpipe, rotating it slowly to ensure even wall thickness, tilting it slightly to encourage the bubble to grow in the desired direction. The material responds to these gentle suggestions like a dancer following a partner's lead, flowing and shifting with grace that seems almost conscious, almost aware of the vision that guides its transformation. The heat of the glass warms the air within the bubble, creating currents and pressures that I must read and respond to with the sensitivity of a musician tuning an instrument. Each breath must be adjusted for these changing conditions, each exhalation modified to account for the glass's evolving characteristics. This is knowledge that lives in the body rather than the mind, understanding that cannot be taught through words, but must be absorbed through patient practice, through the gradual accumulation of sensitivity that comes only through years of communion with molten light. I pause in my breathing to examine the developing form, holding it up to catch the workshop's complex illumination. The glow of furnaces mixing with the pale light of morning filtering through windows, creating conditions that exist nowhere else on earth. In this perfect light, I can see not just the glass's current state, but its potential, its readiness for the next stage of transformation, its willingness to accept further shaping. The bubble has reached the size I envisioned, its walls perfectly uniform, its shape pleasing to the eye and promising for the work ahead. But this is only the beginning, the raw form that will serve as foundation for the more complex shaping that will follow. The glass must now be reheated, reshaped, refined through a series of operations that will gradually transform this simple bubble into something worthy of the cristallo from which it was born.
Paolo steps forward with the wooden paddle that will help shape the glass's base, his movements careful and deliberate. He has learned through painful experience that haste is the enemy of beauty, that the glass demands patience, respect, and above all, the willingness to work within the constraints that the material itself imposes. The paddle's surface has been charred and smoothed through years of use, its wood seasoned to the perfect density that allows it to shape glass without shocking it into fracture. I return the glass to the glory hole for reheating, watching as the flames restore the perfect working temperature, as the material regains the malleability that further shaping requires. The bubble glows more intensely in the furnace's embrace, its walls becoming more fluid, more responsive to the craftsman's touch. This cycle of heating and shaping will be repeated many times before the piece is complete, each iteration bringing it closer to the vision that guides its creation. The breath that gave this glass its initial form continues to live within it, trapped in the hollow space that defines its essential character. Long after the piece is finished, long after it has cooled and been annealed, that breath will remain, a permanent reminder of the moment when human intention met elemental fire and created something that transcends the sum of its parts. In every blown glass vessel lies the ghost of the craftsman's breath, the invisible signature of the master who gave it life through the ancient marriage of air and fire.
The glory hole becomes my partner in the ancient choreography of creation, its flames reaching out like eager hands to embrace the glass as I guide it into the furnace's heart. The heat strikes the material with perfect intensity, neither too gentle nor too fierce, restoring the malleability that allows glass to flow like liquid light while maintaining the structural integrity that keeps it from collapsing under its own weight.
This is the dance that has been performed in this workshop for centuries, the eternal pas de deux between fire and glass, between human intention and elemental force. I begin the rotation that will ensure even heating, turning the blowpipe with movements that have become as natural as the beating of my heart. The glass responds to the furnace's embrace like a flower opening to the sun, its surface beginning to glow with renewed intensity, its walls becoming fluid enough to accept the shaping that will follow. The bubble within expands slightly as the heated air grows warmer, and I adjust my grip to accommodate this subtle change in the piece's balance and behavior. Paolo watches from beside the marver, that flat iron plate where glass is rolled and shaped, his young hands already reaching for the tools we will need for the next phase of work. He has learned to anticipate my movements, to read the subtle signs that indicate when the glass is ready for each stage of transformation. The wooden paddle rests in his grip, its surface darkened by years of contact with molten glass, its edges worn smooth by countless encounters with material that exists at the very edge of human endurance. The glass reaches the perfect temperature, that narrow window where it becomes maximally responsive to the craftsman's touch while retaining enough body to hold its shape. I withdraw it from the glory hole and move to the marver, feeling the weight of the piece shift as the heated material flows and settles. This is the moment when vision begins to take concrete form, when the abstract idea that has been growing in my mind starts to manifest in the physical world. I roll the glass across the marver's surface with gentle pressure, feeling the material respond to this new form of guidance. The iron plate, heated by contact with countless pieces of molten glass, provides the perfect surface for this initial shaping. Hard enough to provide resistance, smooth enough to allow the glass to flow freely, warm enough to prevent thermal shock that could shatter the delicate bubble I have created. The piece begins to take on a more defined shape as I work, the random curves of the blown bubble giving way to the intentional forms that will characterize the finished vessel. Paolo assists with the paddle, applying gentle pressure where I indicate, helping to flatten the base that will allow the piece to stand stable and proud. His movements are careful, deliberate, born of months of training that have taught him to read the glass's moods, to understand when it welcomes shaping and when it resists. The workshop fills with the soft sounds of creation, the gentle hiss of glass cooling slightly as it contacts the marver, the whisper of the paddle against the material's surface, the almost inaudible crackle of thermal stresses being relieved through careful manipulation. These are the sounds that have echoed through this space for generations, the acoustic signature of transformation, the music that accompanies the daily miracle of turning sand into light. I returned the piece to the glory hole for another cycle of heating, watching as the flames restore the working temperature with mathematical precision. The glass glows more intensely, its color shifting from the deep amber of cooling material to the brilliant orange-white that signals perfect malleability. This rhythm of heating and shaping will continue throughout the morning, each cycle bringing the piece closer to its final form, each iteration revealing new possibilities and new challenges. The dance between fire and glass becomes more complex as the work progresses, requiring increasingly subtle adjustments of temperature and timing. The glass must be kept hot enough to remain workable, but not so hot that it loses its ability to hold the shapes I impose upon it. This balance exists in a narrow range that can only be maintained through constant attention, through the kind of sensitivity that comes only from decades of communion with molten light. Paolo brings fresh tools as they are needed. Jacks for opening and shaping the vessel's mouth, shears for trimming excess material, blocks for smoothing and refining the surface. Each implement has been crafted specifically for our work, forged from metals that can withstand the extreme temperatures we routinely encounter, shaped to fit comfortably in hands that must work with precision despite the intense heat that surrounds every operation. The piece begins to reveal its essential character as the shaping progresses, the vision in my mind finding expression through the accumulated pressure of countless small adjustments. What started as a simple bubble of blown glass is becoming something more complex, more purposeful, more beautiful. The walls thin and thicken according to my intentions. The curves flow where I guide them. The proportions align with the classical ideals that have governed our craft since its earliest days.
The glory hole's flames seem to dance in approval as I work, their colors shifting and flowing in patterns that speak of perfect combustion, optimal temperature, ideal conditions for the transformation taking place. The furnace has become more than mere tool. It is partner, collaborator, the elemental force that makes possible the marriage between human vision and material reality. As the morning progresses, the piece takes on a life of its own, responding to my guidance while asserting its own character, its own preferences, its own contribution to the creative dialogue. This is what separates true craftsmanship from mere technique, the recognition that the material itself is an active participant in the creative process, that the finest work emerges not from domination, but from collaboration, not from forcing the glass to accept human will, but from finding the perfect balance between intention and material possibility. The dance continues, fire and glass moving together in the ancient rhythm that has governed this craft since its inception, each movement building upon the last, each adjustment bringing the piece closer to the moment when it will emerge from the furnace's embrace as something complete, something beautiful, something worthy of the cristallo from which it was born, and the centuries of knowledge that guided its creation.
The moment arrives when I must introduce color into the crystal clarity of the glass, transforming its pure transparency into something that captures and holds light like a jeweled chalice. This is where our craft transcends mere technique and enters the realm of alchemy, where secret formulas passed down through bloodlines transform base metals into hues that seem to glow with their own inner fire. I approach the color furnace with the reverence due to a sacred mystery, for here lie the recipes that have made Murano glass legendary throughout the known world. The aventurine waits in its crucible like liquid starlight, the gold particles suspended within the molten glass, creating a constellation of brilliance that seems to pulse with captured sunlight. This is perhaps our most closely guarded secret, the technique of incorporating precious metals into glass without destroying their essential properties, without allowing them to oxidize or clump or lose their ability to catch and reflect light. The formula was discovered by my great-grandfather through years of experimentation, and its knowledge has never left our family. I gather a small amount of the aventurine on a puntal, watching as the golden particles swirl and dance within the clear matrix, creating patterns that seem almost alive, almost conscious of their own beauty. The metal flakes catch the furnace light and throw it back in brilliant flashes, each one a tiny mirror that reflects not just illumination, but the accumulated fire of centuries of creation. This is glass that seems to generate its own light, that glows from within with an intensity that no external source could provide. Paolo watches with wide eyes as I begin to incorporate the aventurine into our piece, rolling the clear glass over the colored material with movements that must be perfectly controlled. Too much pressure, and the gold will streak and smear, losing its discreet beauty. Too little, and it will not adhere properly, creating weak points that will fail when the piece cools. The technique requires not just skill, but intuition, the ability to feel through the tools how the materials are responding to each other. The gold begins to spiral through the clear glass like captured lightning, creating patterns that seem to move and shift even as they become permanently fixed within the crystal matrix. This is the magic of aventurine, the way it seems to hold motion within stillness, to suggest infinite depth within finite space, to create the illusion that the viewer is looking not at glass, but through a window into some celestial realm where stars dance in eternal celebration.
I return the piece to the glory hole, watching as the heat causes the gold particles to settle into their final positions, their brilliance intensifying as the glass reaches working temperature. The aventurine creates veins of light that run through the clear material like golden rivers, each one following the flow patterns established during the incorporation process, each one unique and unrepeatable, each one a signature of this particular moment in the ongoing dialogue between craftsman and material. The workshop fills with reflected light as the piece emerges from the furnace, the aventurine throwing back the flames glow in countless tiny mirrors that create a constellation of brilliance around the work area. This is why we work in the early morning hours, when the natural light is gentle enough to allow us to see the true colors, when the harsh glare of midday sun will not overwhelm the subtle interplay of gold and crystal that defines our finest work. But aventurine is only one of the colors in our secret palette. I move to another crucible where silver-based glass waits like liquid moonlight, its surface rippling with the pale fire that comes from incorporating the most precious of metals into our crystal matrix. This is the material from which we create our famous mirrors, glass so pure and reflective that it seems to capture not just images but souls, not just appearances but the essential truth that lies beneath surface reality. The silver glass requires different handling than the gold, different temperatures, different techniques of incorporation. Where aventurine welcomes bold movements and dramatic gestures, silver demands subtlety, patience, the kind of gentle coaxing that reveals its beauty gradually rather than all at once. I work with it like a musician playing a delicate melody, each movement calculated to bring out the material's inherent qualities without overwhelming its essential nature. Paolo brings fresh tools as the work progresses, specialized paddles for working with metallic glass, shears designed to cut through material that contains precious metals without damaging their reflective properties, blocks carved from rare woods that will not react with the silver compounds. Each implement represents generations of refinement, centuries of accumulated knowledge about how to work with materials that exist at the very edge of possibility.
The piece begins to take on an otherworldly quality as the metallic elements are incorporated, the clear crystal becoming a canvas for light effects that seem to defy natural law. The aventurine creates warm golden highlights that pulse with inner fire, while the silver adds cool reflective surfaces that seem to open windows into infinite space. The combination creates depth and complexity that transforms the simple vessel into something approaching sculpture, something that exists as much for its beauty as for its function.
The color work requires multiple trips to the glory hole, each heating cycle allowing for new additions, new layers of complexity. I add touches of cobalt blue that seem to hold captured sky, threads of copper red that glow like banked coals, whispers of chromium green that suggest the depths of forest pools. Each color has its own personality, its own requirements, its own contribution to the growing symphony of light and hue that the piece is becoming. The morning light streaming through the workshop windows mingles with the furnace glow to create illumination that exists nowhere else on earth, light that reveals the true nature of our colored glass, that shows each hue in its perfect intensity and clarity. In this perfect illumination, the piece seems to come alive, to pulse with the accumulated fire of all the elements that have been incorporated into its crystal heart. The colors dance together within the glass matrix like partners in an eternal ballet, each one maintaining its individual character while contributing to the greater harmony of the whole. This is the ultimate achievement of our craft, not just the creation of beautiful objects, but the capture of light itself, the transformation of fire and metal and sand into something that seems to glow with its own inner radiance, something that carries within it the accumulated wisdom of centuries and the promise of beauty that will endure long after the hands that shaped it have returned to dust. The heavy oak door to the inner sanctum bears no marking, no sign to indicate what lies beyond its iron-bound surface. Only the masters of the highest rank possess the key that opens this chamber, and even among us the knowledge contained within is shared reluctantly, passed down through bloodlines, with oaths that bind not just the speaker but his descendants unto the 7th generation. I unlock the door with hands that tremble slightly, not from age, but from the weight of responsibility that comes with access to secrets that could topple empires, that could shift the balance of power between nations as surely as any army or fleet. The chamber beyond exists in perpetual twilight, lit only by a single oil lamp that burns with a flame fed by oils whose composition is itself a closely guarded mystery. The walls are lined with shelves that hold not books, but small ceramic vessels, each one containing formulas written in cipher, recipes encoded in symbols that would be meaningless to any but the initiated. These are the true treasures of Murano, not the finished pieces that grace the palaces of princes, but the knowledge that makes such pieces possible. I approach the shelf that holds my family's contributions to this library of secrets, vessels that contain the accumulated discoveries of 5 generations of masters. Here rests the formula for aventurine, written in my great-grandfather's careful hand using an alphabet known only to our bloodline. Beside it sits the recipe for our clearest cristallo, the proportions of sand and ash and flux that create glass so pure it seems to be made of crystallized air itself. Each vessel represents years of experimentation, decades of refinement, lifetimes devoted to pushing the boundaries of what glass can become. The Council of 10 knows of this chamber's existence, though they have never seen its contents. Their spies watch our workshops, count our shipments, monitor our apprentices for signs of disloyalty or indiscretion. They understand that Venice's dominance in trade depends not just on her ships and merchants, but on the monopoly we maintain over the secrets of glassmaking. A single formula leaked to competitors in Bohemia or France could cost the Republic millions in lost revenue, could undermine the economic foundation upon which our tower rests. I select a vessel from the highest shelf, one that contains knowledge so dangerous that it has never been committed to writing, passed down only through whispered words from father to son in the moments before death. This is the secret of incorporating diamonds into glass, not as decoration, but as integral components that transform the material's very nature, that create optical properties impossible to achieve through any other means. The technique requires temperatures so precise that a variation of even a few degrees will destroy both the diamonds and the glass, reducing months of work to worthless slag.
The formula exists in my memory like a prayer learned in childhood, each step burned into consciousness through repetition and reverence. The diamonds must be of specific quality, not the largest or most perfect, but those with particular crystalline structures that will survive the incorporation process. They must be heated gradually, their carbon lattice prepared through techniques that border on the alchemical, their surfaces treated with compounds that exist nowhere outside this chamber. Paolo waits in the outer workshop, unaware of the knowledge being accessed on his behalf. He has shown promise, demonstrated the kind of intuitive understanding that suggests he might one day be worthy of deeper secrets. But that day is years away, perhaps decades. The knowledge contained in this chamber is not given lightly, not shared with any who have not proven themselves through trials that test not just skill but character, not just ability but absolute loyalty to the traditions that have made our craft legendary. I return to the workshop, carrying with me not physical materials, but something far more precious. The mental formulas that will allow today's work to transcend the merely beautiful and enter the realm of the miraculous. The piece we have been creating shows promise, demonstrates the kind of structural integrity and aesthetic harmony that makes it worthy of our most advanced techniques. But to truly fulfill its potential, it must be transformed through processes that push the very boundaries of what glass can become. The diamond incorporation begins with preparations that would seem like ritual to the uninitiated. The furnace temperature must be adjusted with mathematical precision, the atmospheric conditions within the glory hole modified through the addition of specific gases that alter the combustion characteristics of the flames. Even the timing matters. This work can only be performed during certain phases of the moon, when the tidal forces that affect all matter create optimal conditions for the delicate transformations we seek to achieve. I begin the process with movements that have been refined through generations of practice, each gesture calculated to create the precise conditions that diamond incorporation requires. The glass must be heated to exactly the right temperature, hot enough to accept the foreign material, cool enough to prevent the diamonds from reverting to their constituent carbon. The margin for error is measured in degrees, in seconds, in the subtle variations of pressure and timing that separate success from catastrophic failure.
The first diamond enters the molten glass like a star falling into liquid light. its crystalline structure beginning to interact with the surrounding matrix in ways that transform both materials. The glass becomes something more than glass, taking on optical properties that seem to defy natural law. Light entering the material is not simply transmitted but transformed, broken into component wavelengths that create rainbow effects of impossible intensity and purity. Paolo watches from a respectful distance, understanding that he is witnessing something beyond his current comprehension, something that represents the pinnacle of our craft's achievement. The knowledge being applied here has been purchased with centuries of experimentation, with failures that cost fortunes, with discoveries that came at the price of masters' lives. Each successful incorporation represents not just technical achievement, but the culmination of generations of accumulated wisdom. The work continues through the morning, each diamond adding new layers of complexity to the piece's optical characteristics. The glass begins to exhibit properties that seem almost supernatural. The ability to focus light into beams of impossible intensity, to create reflections that appear to exist in dimensions beyond the merely physical, to generate colors that have no names because they exist nowhere else in nature. This is the true power of our secrets, not just the ability to create beautiful objects, but to push the boundaries of reality itself, to create materials that exist at the intersection of science and magic, that demonstrate the unlimited potential that lies hidden within the most humble materials when they are transformed through knowledge, through skill, through the accumulated wisdom of masters who understood that glass is not just sand made transparent, but light itself made solid.
Young Marco stands before the shattered remains of his first goblet, tears streaming down his face as he stares at the crystalline fragments scattered across the workshop floor like fallen stars. The piece had been beautiful, perhaps too beautiful for a first attempt. Its walls thin as butterfly wings, its proportions elegant enough to grace a doge's table. But beauty means nothing if it cannot survive the cooling process, and Marco's goblet had succumbed to thermal stress in the final moments, cracking with a sound like a heart breaking. I approach the weeping boy with the measured steps of one who has witnessed this scene countless times before, who understands that failure is not the enemy of learning, but its most demanding teacher. The fragments at our feet represent more than mere broken glass. They are the physical manifestation of lessons that cannot be taught through words, wisdom that can only be acquired through the bitter experience of watching one's vision crumble into irreparable ruin. "Tell me what you see," I say gently, kneeling beside the scattered pieces. Marco wipes his eyes with the back of his hand, leaving streaks of soot across his cheeks, and forces himself to examine the wreckage of his ambition. This is the first test of a true craftsman, the ability to learn from failure rather than simply mourn it, to read the story that broken glass tells about the forces that destroyed it. "The cracks started here," he says, pointing to a fragment near what had been the goblet's base. "It ran up the wall in a spiral, following the stress lines." His voice wavers, but grows stronger as he continues the analysis. I think I cooled it too quickly. I was so eager to see the finished piece that I didn't give it time to anneal properly." Good. The boy is learning to see beyond the immediate tragedy to the underlying causes, to understand that glass breaks according to laws as immutable as those that govern the movement of planets. Every crack tells a story. Every fracture reveals information about temperatures and timing, about the invisible forces that determine whether a piece will survive or shatter. This knowledge, purchased with tears and disappointment, is more valuable than any technique that comes easily. I gather some of the larger fragments, holding them up to catch the morning light that streams through the workshop windows. Even in destruction, the glass retains its beauty. The aventurine still glows with golden fire. The crystal matrix still holds its perfect clarity. The failure lies not in the materials or even in the basic technique, but in the subtle timing that separates the master from the apprentice, the patience that allows glass to cool at its own pace rather than forcing it to conform to human schedules.
Your grandfather's first piece also shattered, I tell Marco, watching as surprise replaces despair in his young eyes. And his grandfather's before him. There is not a master on this island who has not stood where you stand now, who has not felt the weight of failure crushing his dreams into fragments. The difference between those who become masters and those who abandon the craft lies not in avoiding failure, but in learning from it.
But why do we continue? Marco asks as he places the last fragment in the wastebasket. Why do we risk so much for something so fragile, so likely to fail? The question goes to the heart of our craft, to the mystery that drives men to dedicate their lives to working with a material that can destroy months of effort in a single moment. I consider my answer carefully, knowing that what I say now may determine whether this boy becomes a master or abandons the workshop forever. Because, I tell him, in those moments when everything goes perfectly, when the glass accepts our vision and transforms it into reality, we participate in something approaching the divine. We take sand and fire and breath and create objects of such beauty that they seem to glow with their own inner light. The risk of failure makes success precious, makes each perfect piece a miracle rather than merely a product. Marco nods slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in his eyes. He sees now that the shattered goblet was not a defeat, but a necessary step on the path to mastery, that the tears he shed were not signs of weakness, but evidence of the passion that drives all true craftsmen. The fragments at his feet represent not the end of his dreams, but their beginning, the foundation upon which his future skills will be built. The morning light continues to stream through the workshop windows, illuminating not just the space where we work, but the eternal cycle of failure and learning that defines our craft. In every master's skill lies the memory of countless failures. In every perfect piece, the ghost of all the imperfect attempts that preceded it. This is the true secret of our craft, not the formulas locked in the inner sanctum, but the understanding that mastery comes not from avoiding failure, but from transforming it into wisdom.
The shadow falls across our workshop without warning, cast not by clouds, but by the silent approach of men whose very presence changes the quality of air itself. I feel their arrival before I see them, that subtle shift in atmosphere that comes when the Council of Ten extends its reach into our world, when the invisible hand of Venice's power makes itself known through representatives who speak in whispers and see everything while revealing nothing of themselves. Signore Grimaldi emerges from the morning mist like a spectre clothed in black silk, his pale eyes taking inventory of our workshop with the methodical precision of a merchant counting coins. Behind him walk two companions whose faces I do not recognize, but whose bearing speaks of authority backed by steel. of questions that demand answers regardless of the respondent's willingness to provide them. They move through our sacred space like wolves entering a sheepfold, their presence transforming our sanctuary of creation into something altogether more dangerous. Signore, Maestro Benedetto. Grimaldi's voice carries the cultured tones of nobility, but underneath lies something harder, more threatening. The council has received reports about certain innovations in your workshop, techniques that perhaps push beyond the traditional boundaries of our craft. His words hang in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre, each syllable weighted with implications that could destroy not just my livelihood, but my life itself. I set down my tools with deliberate calm, though my heart pounds against my ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The piece I have been working on, the goblet enhanced with diamond incorporation, glows innocently in the glory hole's embrace, its revolutionary properties hidden beneath a surface that appears conventionally beautiful. But Grimaldi's eyes linger with it on the intensity of a hawk studying prey, and I know that our secrets may not be as well guarded as we believed. Signore, I reply, my voice steady despite the fear that courses through my veins like molten glass. We practice only the techniques passed down through generations, the methods that have made Murano glass the wonder of the world. Innovation, as you well know, is forbidden by the ancient laws that govern our craft.
Grimaldi's smile holds no warmth, no humor, only the cold satisfaction of a predator who knows his prey has nowhere to run. Of course, Maestro, we would expect nothing less from such a traditional craftsman. But perhaps you would not object to a small demonstration? The Council is always interested in observing the techniques that maintain our Republic's dominance in the glass trade. The request is not a request, but a command wrapped in silk of courtesy, and I know that refusal would be interpreted as evidence of guilt, as confirmation of the suspicions that brought these men to our workshop. I nod my agreement while my mind races through possibilities, searching for ways to demonstrate our skill without revealing the revolutionary techniques that could cost us everything. Paolo and Marco stand frozen at their stations, understanding instinctively that they are witnessing something far more dangerous than any furnace fire, more threatening than any molten glass. The apprentices have heard the stories whispered in taverns and marketplaces, tales of masters who disappeared in the night, of workshops that burned under mysterious circumstances, of families whose bloodlines ended abruptly when their knowledge became inconvenient to the state. I approach the furnace with movements calculated to appear routine, normal, unremarkable to eyes that seek evidence of forbidden innovation. The glass I gather on my pontil is pure cristallo, beautiful but conventional, enhanced by nothing more revolutionary than the traditional techniques that have been practiced on this island for centuries. Yet even this simple demonstration carries risks. The quality of our materials, the precision of our methods, the subtle refinements that separate our work from that of lesser craftsmen could themselves be interpreted as evidence of dangerous advancement. The gathering proceeds under Grimaldi's watchful gaze, each movement scrutinized for signs of deviation from approved methods. I work with the careful precision of a man walking across thin ice, knowing that a single misstep could plunge me into depths from which there is no return. The glass responds to my guidance with its usual obedience, flowing and shaping according to techniques that appear traditional, while concealing innovations that could revolutionize the craft. "Remarkable," Grimaldi murmurs as the piece takes shape, his voice carrying undertones that could be admiration or suspicion. "The clarity of your cristallo is exceptional. One might almost think it enhanced by methods unknown to other workshops.
The words are spoken casually, conversationally, but they carry the weight of accusation, the suggestion that our success stems from forbidden knowledge rather than superior skill.
I continue working while formulating my response, understanding that every word must be chosen with the care of a diplomat negotiating between warring nations. The quality comes from our materials, signore. Sand selected from specific beaches, ash prepared according to ancient formulas, flux refined through methods passed down through my family for generations. We guard these traditional secrets as carefully as any innovation, for they are the foundation upon which our reputation rests. The explanation satisfies the letter of truth while concealing its spirit, acknowledging our superior results while attributing them to conventional causes. This is the dance we must perform whenever authority takes interest in our work, revealing enough to demonstrate compliance while concealing enough to protect the innovations that truly set us apart. The morning progresses under this cloud of scrutiny, every action observed and analyzed, every technique examined for signs of forbidden advancement. The Council's representatives move through our workshop like auditors of the soul, counting not just our materials and methods, but our thoughts and intentions, seeking evidence of the kind of innovation that could threaten Venice's monopoly on glass-making knowledge. Yet, beneath their watchful eyes, the ancient work continues. Glass flows and shapes. Fire transforms sand into light. Human vision finds expression through techniques that bridge the gap between tradition and revolution. We are walking a tightrope stretched between innovation and survival, between the advancement of our craft and the preservation of our lives, between the pursuit of beauty and the demands of political necessity.
The Council's representatives finally depart as the sun reaches its zenith, their black-clad figures dissolving back into the shadows from which they emerged, leaving behind only the lingering scent of suspicion and the weight of unspoken threats. I watch from the workshop window as their gondola glides away across the lagoon, its wake spreading in ever-widening circles that seem to carry with them the ripples of danger that will continue to affect our lives long after their physical presence has vanished. The workshop feels different in their absence, not relieved, but somehow diminished, as if their scrutiny has drained something essential from the very air we breathe. Paolo and Marco move about their tasks with the careful deliberation of men who have looked into an abyss and found it looking back, their young faces marked by the premature wisdom that comes from understanding how precarious our position truly is. The innocence of pure craftsmanship has been shattered, replaced by the harsh knowledge that our art exists at the sufferance of powers that could destroy us without warning or explanation. But tonight, in the hours when darkness provides cover and the lagoon mists conceal our activities from watching eyes, I will attempt something that my grandfather forbade, something that could revolutionize our craft or destroy us all. The technique has haunted my dreams for months, a method of incorporating living flame into glass itself, of creating vessels that glow with their own inner fire, that seem to burn without consuming themselves, that challenge the very boundaries between the possible and impossible. The formula exists only in my mind, pieced together from fragments of ancient knowledge, from whispered hints in texts that predate the founding of Venice itself, from observations made during decades of working with materials that exist at the very edge of human understanding. No master has attempted this technique for over a century, not since my great-grandfather's brother died in the explosion that destroyed the Eastern workshop and left a crater where the building once stood. As evening approaches, I send the apprentices home with instructions to speak to no one about the day's events, to forget the faces of the men who visited us, to continue their work as if nothing unusual had occurred. Their safety depends on their ignorance, their survival on their ability to appear innocent of any knowledge that might interest the Council's investigators. The burden of dangerous innovation must rest on my shoulders alone.
There are rumors, he says, lowering his voice to a whisper that barely carries over the sound of lapping waves, of a beach in the far Indies where the sand is said to be made of ground pearls, where the very grains hold the essence of the sea itself. The local craftsmen claim that glass made from this material can show visions of distant places, can reveal truths hidden from ordinary sight. His words carry the weight of legend, of possibilities that exist at the very edge of belief. The afternoon is spent in careful testing of the new materials, small experimental batches that will reveal their properties and potential. Each type of sand requires different treatment, different temperatures, different combinations with flux and ash. The work is painstaking, methodical, requiring the patience of a scholar and the intuition of an artist. But with each successful test comes new understanding, new possibilities for pushing the boundaries of our ancient craft. The materials from distant shores represent more than mere ingredients. They are connections to a wider world, reminders that our island, for all its isolation, is part of a vast network of knowledge and discovery that spans the known world. In every grain of foreign sand lies the potential for revolution, for innovations that could transform not just our craft, but our understanding of what glass can become. As evening approaches and the testing concludes, I find myself contemplating the vast web of human endeavor that brings these treasures to our workshop. Somewhere beyond the horizon, other craftsmen work with materials we have never seen, experiment with techniques we have never imagined, push against boundaries we have never encountered. The exchange of materials is also an exchange of ideas, a slow cross-pollination of knowledge that enriches all who participate in it.
The morning brings ships from distant shores, their holds heavy with treasures that speak of lands beyond the horizon's edge. I watch from the workshop window as the vessels navigate the treacherous channels that lead to our island, their captains guided by knowledge as closely guarded as any of our glass-making secrets. Each ship carries more than mere cargo. It brings stories written in sand and salt, tales of beaches where different minerals create different possibilities, narratives of discovery that could transform our ancient craft. Captain Morosini's galley rides low in the water, her hull pregnant with sand from the shores of Cyprus, where volcanic activity has created beaches of such purity that the grains seem to glow with their own inner light. This is not ordinary sand, but material that has been refined by geological forces beyond human understanding, compressed and heated and cooled through cycles that span millennia, emerging as crystals so perfect that they seem to have been crafted by divine hands rather than natural processes. I make my way to the harbor as the ship docks, my leather purse heavy with the gold that such precious materials command. Sand from Cyprus costs more per pound than silver, yet its value to our craft cannot be measured in mere currency. Glass made from this material achieves a clarity that borders on the supernatural, a transparency so perfect that vessels seem to be carved from crystallized air itself. The Doge's own goblet was made from Cypriot sand, and it is said that wine drunk from it tastes of paradise itself. Morosini greets me with the weathered smile of a man who has sailed beyond the edges of maps, who has seen wonders that exist only in the tales of travelers and the dreams of poets. His hands are stained with the salt of a dozen seas. His eyes hold the wisdom of one who has learned to read the moods of wind and wave, the subtle signs that separate safe passage from watery grave. He is more than merchant. He is explorer, adventurer, the bridge between our isolated island and the vast world that lies beyond the lagoon's embrace. Maestro Benedetto, he says, his voice carrying the music of distant shores, I bring you treasures from the ends of the earth, sand from beaches where no Christian foot has trod, ash from trees that grow in the shadow of mountains that touch the sky, minerals that exist nowhere else in God's creation. His words paint pictures of exotic landscapes, of shores where different laws of nature create different possibilities for those bold enough to experiment with unknown materials.
The unloading begins under my careful supervision. Each sack of sand examined for purity, each container of ash tested for the qualities that will determine its usefulness in our work. The materials come from beaches I can barely imagine. Shores of black volcanic glass where the sea meets molten rock. White coral sands that have been ground by centuries of waves. Red desert sands that carry within them the fire of the sun itself. Each type offers different possibilities, different challenges, different opportunities for innovation. The sand from the Levantine coast glows with a golden hue that speaks of minerals unknown in our local materials, compounds that could create colors never before seen in glass. The ash from Egyptian palms carries alkaline properties that could revolutionize our flux formulations, allowing us to work at lower temperatures while achieving greater clarity. The crushed shells from Indian Ocean beaches contain calcium compounds that could strengthen our glass while maintaining its transparency. Paolo and Marco assist in the careful cataloging of each material, their young minds struggling to comprehend the vast network of trade and exploration that brings these treasures to our workshop. They see only sacks of sand and containers of ash, but I see the accumulated knowledge of civilizations, the patient experimentation of craftsmen who worked with different materials under different skies, the slow accumulation of understanding that spans continents and centuries. Each material tells its own story of origin and discovery. The sand from the shores of Crete carries within it the memory of ancient palaces, of craftsmen who worked in bronze and gold when our ancestors still lived in mud huts. The volcanic ash from the slopes of Vesuvius speaks of fires that dwarf our humble furnaces, of temperatures that could melt stone and transform the very landscape itself. The coral sand from distant atolls, whispers of seas so blue they seem to hold captured sky, of islands where time moves differently, and the boundary between earth and heaven grows thin. Morosini shares tales of the journeys that brought these materials to our door, storms weathered in unknown seas, negotiations conducted in languages that exist only in remote corners of the world, dangers faced in pursuit of substances that most men would consider worthless. He speaks of beaches where the sand sings in the wind, of mountains where the very rocks glow with inner fire,
of forests where the trees produce ash that burns with colors never seen in ordinary flames.
The stars fade into the pearl-gray light of another dawn, and still the mother furnace burns with the same steady flame that has illuminated this workshop for 3 centuries. I stand before her glowing mouth as I have every morning for 30 years, feeling the heat wash over me like a benediction, like the breath of some ancient god who has chosen to make his dwelling among mortals who shape light itself into objects of impossible beauty. The night's work lies cooling in the annealing oven, the vessel enhanced with living flame that defied every law of nature I thought I understood. It rests there like a sleeping star, its inner fire banked but not extinguished, waiting for the slow cooling process that will determine whether my revolutionary technique has succeeded or whether I have created nothing more than an elaborate failure. The hours of annealing stretch ahead like an eternity, each one bringing either triumph or catastrophe closer to revelation. Paolo arrives as the first bells of the morning ring across the lagoon, his young face bright with the eagerness that marks all true apprentices. He has learned not to ask about the work I perform in the deep hours of night, understanding that some knowledge must be earned through patience rather than curiosity, that the greatest secrets reveal themselves only to those who have proven worthy through years of faithful service to the lesser mysteries. The morning ritual begins as it always has, the careful feeding of the mother furnace, the testing of temperatures, the preparation of materials for another day of communion with molten light. But today feels different, charged with the potential energy of innovation, heavy with the weight of possibilities that could transform our craft or destroy us all. The vessel in the annealing oven pulses with contained fire, its presence affecting everything around it like a lodestone affects iron filings. I begin the day's work with conventional pieces, goblets and bowls that will satisfy our regular commissions while concealing the revolutionary experiments that occupy my thoughts. The familiar rhythms of gathering and shaping provide comfort, grounding me in the ancient traditions that have sustained our craft through centuries of change and challenge. Yet, even as I work with time-tested techniques, my mind dwells on the vessel that cools in darkness, on the living flame that may or may not survive the transition from molten to solid state. The morning progresses with its usual symphony of controlled chaos, the roar of furnaces, the hiss of cooling glass, the gentle bubble of molten material waiting to be shaped. Marco joins us as the sun climbs higher, bringing with him the quiet intensity that marks all who have felt the touch of true calling. He has learned much from yesterday's failure, his movements more careful now, more respectful of the forces we seek to harness.
The workshop fills with the familiar perfume of creation, heated sand and molten minerals, the sharp tang of flux and the earthy scent of ash. These are the incenses of our particular devotion, the aromatics that accompany our daily prayers to the gods of fire and light. But underneath these familiar scents lies something new, something that speaks of innovations that push beyond the boundaries of traditional craft into realms where science and magic become indistinguishable. As the hours pass, I find myself drawn repeatedly to the annealing oven, checking the temperature, monitoring the slow cooling process that will determine the fate of my experiment. The vessel within glows with diminishing intensity as it gradually releases the heat that gave it birth, its inner fire slowly stabilizing into whatever form the cooling process will allow. This is the most crucial phase, when success and failure hang in perfect balance, when the slightest variation in temperature or timing could transform triumph into disaster.
The afternoon brings visitors, merchants seeking commissions, nobles requesting special pieces, fellow masters sharing gossip and technical insights. I receive them all with the courtesy that our position demands, but my attention remains divided. Part of my consciousness always aware of the vessel that cools in darkness, of the revolutionary technique that may or may not survive its first trial. The sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, painting the lagoon in shades of gold and crimson that rival any glass we have ever created. The light streaming through our windows takes on that perfect quality that reveals truth without deception, that shows materials in their essential nature rather than their surface appearance. In this honest illumination, even our most conventional pieces seem to glow with inner fire, seem to capture and hold the very essence of light itself. The moment arrives when the annealing process is complete, when the vessel has cooled sufficiently to reveal whether my technique has succeeded or failed. I approach the oven with hands that tremble despite decades of experience, understanding that what I am about to discover could change not just my own life, but the entire future of our craft. The door opens with a whisper of escaping heat, revealing the vessel within like a jewel in a casket. The glass glows with its own inner light, the living flame I captured within its crystal matrix burning with steady radiance that seems to generate no heat, that appears to violate every law of nature while somehow remaining perfectly stable. The technique has succeeded beyond my wildest hopes, creating something that transcends mere craftsmanship and enters the realm of the miraculous, something that will either establish my reputation as the greatest innovator in our craft's history, or mark me for destruction by forces that fear change above all else.
The vessel pulses with contained fire, each beat like the heartbeat of some celestial being, each flash of inner light a reminder that I have succeeded in capturing something that should not be capturable, in making permanent something that should by its very nature be transient. This is glass that burns without being consumed, light that shines without generating heat, fire that exists in perfect balance between creation and destruction. As darkness falls over the lagoon and the stars emerge in their eternal patterns, the mother furnace continues to burn with the same steady flame that has illuminated this workshop for 3 centuries. But tonight, she is no longer alone. Beside her glows another light, one born of human innovation and divine inspiration, one that speaks of possibilities yet to be explored, of boundaries yet to be crossed, of mysteries yet to be unraveled. The eternal flame burns on, guardian of secrets that time cannot extinguish, keeper of knowledge that spans the centuries, witness to the endless human quest to transform the humble materials of earth into objects that capture the very essence of light itself. In its steady glow lies the promise of tomorrow's innovations, the hope of discoveries yet to come, the eternal possibility that the next gathering of molten glass might yield miracles that surpass even our wildest dreams.
The workshop settles into the profound silence that comes only in the deepest hours of night, when Murano sleeps beneath the canopy of stars that have watched over this island since before the first furnace was lit, before the first grain of sand was transformed into crystal light. The mother furnace breathes quietly in the darkness, her flames reduced to glowing embers that pulse with the rhythm of centuries, each beat a reminder of the unbroken chain of knowledge that connects this moment to all the moments that came before. The vessel with its captured flame rests on my workbench like a fallen star, its inner fire casting dancing shadows on the workshop walls, creating patterns of light that seem to move with their own mysterious purpose. This is no longer mere glass, but something that exists at the intersection of craft and miracle, a physical manifestation of the impossible made possible through the marriage of ancient wisdom and revolutionary innovation. I move through the familiar space with the slow deliberation of one completing a sacred ritual, my footsteps soft on floors that have supported generations of masters, my hands touching tools that have shaped countless visions into reality. The pontil rods stand in their rack like sleeping sentinels, their iron surfaces bearing the patina of decades of service, the accumulated wisdom of countless encounters with molten light. The crucibles hold their treasures of colored glass, aventurine that glows like liquid gold, silver-based material that captures moonlight and holds it prisoner, cobalt blue that seems to contain fragments of sky itself. Each color waits patiently for tomorrow's work, for the moment when it will be called to serve in the ongoing dialogue between human vision and elemental fire. Outside, the lagoon lies still as black glass beneath the stars, its surface broken only by the gentle wake of a late gondolier making his way home through channels that have carried the dreams and ambitions of Venice for 1,000 years. The mist rises from the dark water like the breath of sleeping giants, wrapping our island in veils of mystery that conceal our secrets from watching eyes. The workshop holds within its ancient walls the accumulated dreams of generations, the hopes of apprentices who learned their craft within these rooms, the ambitions of masters who pushed the boundaries of possibility, the quiet satisfaction of journeymen who found their calling in the patient transformation of sand into light. Each beam and stone carries memory. Each tool holds the ghost of hands that wielded it in service to beauty. The captured flame pulses with gentle radiance, its light neither harsh nor demanding, but somehow comforting, like the glow of a hearth fire that promises warmth without threatening destruction. This is fire tamed and transformed, elemental force made servant to human vision, the impossible achievement of containing infinity within the finite boundaries of crystal glass. As I prepare to extinguish the oil lamp that has guided my night's work, I pause to contemplate the vessel that represents the culmination of everything I have learned, everything I have dared to attempt. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, the need to perfect the technique, to understand its implications, to decide whether such knowledge should be shared or hidden, whether innovation serves humanity or threatens it. The mother furnace settles into her nighttime rhythm, her flames banking to the precise temperature that will maintain the glass in perfect readiness for tomorrow's work. She has witnessed the birth of countless miracles, has been partner to innovations that changed the world, has kept faith with the ancient covenant between fire and human ambition that defines our craft. The darkness deepens around the workshop, but it is not empty darkness. It pulses with potential, with the accumulated energy of centuries of creation, with the promise of discoveries yet to be made. In this sacred space where fire and human vision meet, where the impossible becomes routine and the miraculous is merely another day's work, time moves differently, flowing like honey, carrying us forward on currents of accumulated wisdom toward futures bright with possibility. The vessel glows quietly in the darkness, its captured flame a beacon that speaks of boundaries crossed, of limitations transcended, of the eternal human quest to push beyond the known into realms where wonder still dwells. It is both ending and beginning, the culmination of one journey and the first step of another, the answer to old questions and the source of new mysteries.
The workshop breathes quietly in the darkness, holding within its ancient embrace the accumulated wisdom of generations, the patient hope of all who have ever believed that beauty matters, that craft endures, that the careful transformation of humble materials can somehow touch the infinite and make it momentarily visible to mortal eyes. The eternal flame burns on, guardian of mysteries that time cannot extinguish, keeper of secrets that span the centuries, witness to the endless human quest to capture light itself and make it serve the dreams of those who dare to believe that sand and fire and breath can be transformed into objects that glow with their own inner radiance, that speak across time in voices of crystal and flame. Good night, traveler of time. May your dreams carry echoes of the voices we have borrowed today, and may tomorrow find you rested in the gentle footprints we have left in the infinite sand of history.